YouTube, what is good? Today we are going to be talking about how to read every single pitch in MLB The Show 25. This is going to be something that's a little bit harder and a little bit more in-depth. However, I do think that overall this will help a lot of players get better. So the first thing I want to mention for this is that your TV and display settings matter. If you are playing on a TV, it is still possible to use these tips. However, if you are playing on a good computer monitor, this is something that can actually really benefit you and should benefit you if you do this correctly. So if you are on a computer monitor, you are going to have to want your resolution be the highest possible that it can be. This is what the options look like for Xbox. I'm not sure what they look like for PlayStation. I don't have one. However, if you click here, you can see for me, I'm on my highest setting at 1440p, and this is the biggest part. You are going to want to make sure your refresh rate is on 120 hertz. If you're unfamiliar what the refresh rate is, it's how often your screen refreshes every second, and 120 hertz, twice the value of 60 hertz, it just will make your game feel a lot smoother and you'll be able to see the ball a lot better. So first up, we are going to be talking about the fastball, and I'm just going to let the CPU pitch to me here. The fastball is pretty simple to know. Luckily in this game, the fastball doesn't really have a whole lot of break to it or anything like that. So if you do see it coming out of the hand and it doesn't have any immediate break, there is a pretty solid chance that it is going to be the fastball. Now, for me personally, I do recommend expecting the best fastball no matter what pitcher is on the mound, especially if you have a guy like with outlier on the mound, you're throwing 103. If you're not ready to hit that fastball, you're not going to be ready to hit at all, and you aren't going to be successful. But I mean, you can see here from Pedro Martinez is that, the fastball is pretty straight. There's nothing crazy coming out of the hand. Out of the hand, it looks pretty straight on, and ultimately, it doesn't really show anything. It's just darting straight to the strike zone, and there's nothing really emphatic to say about it. So next up, we are going to have the circle changeup. Now, the circle changeup is a little bit easier to read, and as you can see, coming out of his hand there, the ball kind of goes up a little bit first. Even when it's low in the zone, when he throws the ball, the ball will kind of be above his hand when he throws it, and it'll sink back down into the zone or out of the zone. Now, luckily, this is one of the easier pitches to hit. It's pretty easy to read it out of the hand, and I do think this is a really good pitch that you should be able to recognize. So next up, we do have the slider. Now, the slider is not the easiest pitch in the world to see. However, as you can kind of notice there, and of course, at this one, I'll slow this down again. The ball kind of starts away from his hand when he throws it. And then, of course, you see the bend about halfway, and it'll have its break on the pitch. Now, as we all know, sliders for the past couple of years have been really good, especially with guys like John Donaldson, Randy Johnson, and it makes your PCI shrink pretty good if you are one of those players who ends up making it to Legend and Go difficulty. So being able to recognize when a slider is coming, not only will you be able to put your PCI on it, but the timing as well, because that's always the hardest part. Being able to recognize the bend, where it's bending and how it's bending. Obviously, certain players have more break than others. This is a really good thing to recognize because this is not an easy pitch to hit at any level. And I do think that, if you're able to recognize the ball kind of release out of his hand away from him, and then you watch it bend back, over time, as you build that muscle memory, you'll be able to recognize that really quickly. So next up, we have the sinker. Now, the sinker is probably one of the harder pitches to see. It kind of looks like a fastball out of the hand, and unfortunately, this is not really one that you can read out of the hand. You kind of have to watch the break as it kind of comes into the zone. It luckily does start to break pretty early, with the sliders kind of like halfway. It does start breaking probably about 3/4 of the way to the plate. And this is one of those ones you're going to have to be a little bit reactive to, and I think this is kind of why sinkers have been so strong in the past couple games, because it's not a ball you could read immediately out of his hand. Now, that being said, if you're able to recognize that break at about the halfway point, depending on the break of the pitcher, you are able to actually go ahead and, hit it. You are able to adjust to it. And I think a good thing to remember, too, is that for most pitchers, the sinker is slower than his fastball. So I do think that is something that can at least help you, something to think about, where if you're like, oh, let's say he throws a 103-mile-an-hour fastball, but his sinker is 98. If you recognize that, oh, wait, there is that little bit of a break, let me slow down a little bit, and you're at least able to maybe at least foul it off, and hopefully he can throw you another pitch. But the sinker is a really good pitch in this game. It's really hard to hit. If you're able to find out where that ball is breaking at, and especially if they're spamming it, this is something that you're going to learn to get down pretty quickly. Next up, we have the curveball, and in my opinion, this is probably the easiest pitch in the game to hit. It's so obvious coming out of the hand. I mean, you see it. It's the most obvious pitch in the world. It's looping. It's long. AO. This is one of those pitches that is just like, you know, it's coming every single time it's thrown. And I feel like even the players that are not that great will probably agree with that. There are some guys where the curveball is super slow, and it's a little bit harder to hit that just because you have to slow yourself down so much. However, I mean, you can see it here with Pedro. I mean, it is a looping curveball, and it's so obvious out of the hand. It goes straight up in the air. It's got the big bend. It's just one of those cards. It's one of those pitches where, you know, if you can't hit it, I honestly don't know what to tell you. It's really obvious. So next up, we are talking about the splitter. Now, we had to change pitchers because Pedro Martinez does not throw a splitter. Now, the splitter is a little bit harder to hit. This is, again, one of those pitches that kind of is a little hard to read out of the hand. And it is something that you're going to have to kind of read the break as it's coming into the zone. But you can see there, if it's kind of in like the upper to middle part of the zone, it does kind of have like that change up, like starts up kind of situation. Now, I do think that, you know, I don't think there's any players in the game, or if there is, there's very few players in the game that have both a changeup and a splitter. So I do think that this is something that is kind of easy to recognize depending on the pitch mix of the pitcher. But I do think that this guy overall and the splitter in general is just a really, really, really good pitch depending on the pitcher that you're throwing. You know, it's pretty quick usually, you know, anywhere between 85 and 90 miles an hour. Some guys it's a little bit higher, some guys it's a little bit lower. The forkball, this is going to be grouped in as well because it's essentially a splitter just with different speeds. But, you know, being able to recognize when it's going to take that bit of a dive is a really important thing to do. And I do think that having that dive on the pitch could actually end up helping a lot of players, especially if you're prone to slamming. Very rarely should you be getting splitters high in the zone, and a lot of times if you do, it's a mistake. So if you're already at the bottom of the zone, and of course the splitter is going to be breaking down that way, you actually might end up running into it just accidentally if you are able to recognize this pitch that it's coming. So the next thing we're going to be looking at is the cutter. Now, the cutter is nothing really too crazy in my opinion. It is a pretty obvious pitch coming out of the hand. Sometimes it does look like a little bit of a fastball if it is a lower break cutter, which can have its benefits. But I do think that, you know, it's kind of similar to a slider, but way less, if that makes sense. The ball does start away from the pitcher's hand, but not nearly as much as a slider does. And I know a lot of guys do have like a cutter slider combo. But I do think that when you are able to recognize and see that break again around that, you know, 75%, 50% of the way there kind of situation, you are able to adjust to it and you are able to hit it. Now, in my opinion, a cutter is just a mini slider. You know, that's the way it looks to me in the game. That's the way my brain processes it. So if you're able to be like, oh, it looks like a slider, but you're also able to process like, oh, it's not breaking as much as a slider, you can see, oh, wait, that's a cutter. It's going to be about the speed for the player, you know, whatever the case is. And I do want to emphasize that this is something that is not going to be easy for most players just off rip. You know, this is something that you're going to have to practice with, custom practice, Diamond Dynasty, whatever. You know, this is something that you're going to have to learn. It's not an overnight change. It might take you a few months, you know, but overall, you know, being able to recognize a pitch like this is very important. Now, the final pitch that we are going to be covering is the sweeper. Now, the sweeper is similar to kind of how the slurve was last year, and I do think this is going to be a really good pitch this year. Now, the sweeper's break is a lot sharper than a slider. However, that means it's also a lot easier to see out of the hand. You know, as you can see here when Garrett Crochet is throwing it, the ball really goes away from him first and then breaks its way back in. You know, the way I see it, this is kind of a slider, but it breaks sharper. The speeds on this are typically around like the 80 to 85 mile an hour mark. Some players it's a little bit slower. But I do think that this is a pitch that is going to be a really good pitch and a really good pitch to recognize, because I feel like a lot of people have that mindset of, oh, it's a new pitch, people won't know how to hit it. But if you're able to recognize it pretty quickly like this, you're going to hit the piss out of it, especially if it's in the middle of the zone like this, as obvious as a pitch like that is. I do think that this is going to be something that's pretty good, if you're able to hit that. And I mean, in my opinion, it's kind of like a slurve, like from last year, but I do think it has a bit of a sharper break, and it's not so vertical in its movement. It does kind of break like a slider in terms of like left to right, but the drop on it is a little bit less than a slurve, and I do think that is something that is kind of unique to this kind of pitch. But with that being said, that is going to be all for today's video. Hopefully these tips do help you. Hopefully these can help you hit World Series now that it's 800 rating. And hey, maybe even catch a flawless or two. But as always, I appreciate you guys for watching this video. I will catch y'all the next one. Hitting tips videos are coming. I'll see y'all then.